She lived in a quiet neighborhood where the streets were lined with tall trees and neat little houses. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and life moved at a calm, steady pace. The woman had moved here a few years ago seeking peace and a fresh start. Her house wasn't big or fancy, but it was hers, and she had worked hard to make it warm and welcoming. She spent a lot of time taking care of her home, keeping it tidy, and decorating it in a way that reflected her personality: bright colors, cozy furniture, and pictures that reminded her of family and friends. Every morning, she woke up early, just as the sun started spilling its golden light over the rooftops. She would slip on her running shoes and step outside with her dog Titan. Titan was a German shepherd, large and strong, with deep brown eyes that seemed to understand everything. The bond between them was extraordinary. Titan wasn't just a pet. He was her companion, her protector, and her best friend. When she ran through the streets, Titan trotting beside her, they felt like a team. The neighbors often waved as she passed, smiling at the sight of the two of them, and she would wave back, enjoying the sense of belonging in the community. By the time she returned home, the day had fully begun. She would shower, dress, and prepare breakfast while Titan watched her, his tail wagging lazily. Sometimes she would talk to him as if he were a person, sharing her plans for the day or laughing at small things that happened online. Work was from home these days, so after breakfast she would settle into her little office corner, her laptop open and Titan lying nearby, his head resting on his paws. There was a rhythm to her life, predictable and safe, and she liked it that way. But even in this calm neighborhood, she had noticed signs that not everything was as peaceful as it seemed. There had been whispers among neighbors about a group of thieves who had been targeting homes. It wasn't just ordinary theft. They seemed to pick certain houses, always careful and quiet, leaving people rattled even when nothing major was stolen. Some neighbors spoke in hushed tones, warning each other to lock doors and keep an eye out. The woman paid attention to these warnings, but she wasn't afraid. She believed in being cautious, but also in trusting her instincts. That evening, she prepared for bed much like any other night. She made sure Titan had eaten and had water. She double-checked that the doors were locked and the lights outside were on. She even turned on a small motion sensor in the backyard, a gadget she had bought months ago after reading about home security online. Titan sat near the living room window, his ears perked up, scanning the yard as though he could sense something invisible. She smiled at him, rubbed his head, and whispered, "You've got my back, right?" Titan let out a low, approving bark as if to say he always would. The night deepened, the streets quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves or distant car. Inside, she relaxed, reading a book and sipping tea. The world outside seemed peaceful, almost sleepy, but in the shadows not far away, a different kind of energy was moving. A gang had been scouting the neighborhood for weeks. They thought this woman's house would be an easy target. They were used to taking what they wanted, often picking homes without fear because they believed no one would challenge them. They didn't know her. They didn't know Titan. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, they made their move. 3 figures crept along the side of the house, careful to avoid the streetlights and security cameras they thought were useless. They whispered among themselves, laughing quietly, mocking the neighborhood and the people who lived there. When they reached the window near the back door, they crouched, ready to pry it open. Inside, Titan's ears twitched. He had been resting near the window but suddenly stiffened. Something was off. The subtle, almost invisible movements outside caught his attention. He growled low, a sound that made even her pause. She set her book down and glanced toward him. Titan's eyes were fixed on the window, intense and focused. Her heart skipped a beat. She had trained him well, and she trusted his instincts. She stood up quietly, making sure not to alert anyone outside that she knew they were there. She reached for her phone, keeping one eye on Titan, who was now pacing slightly, growling softly. The gang tried the window handle, muttering under their breath when it wouldn't budge. They laughed, thinking the sound of Titan was just an ordinary dog barking. They had underestimated him, and underestimated her. Titan suddenly barked louder, his sharp teeth visible for a moment as he snapped at the intruders through the glass. The woman moved closer to the window, her pulse quickening but her mind clear. She didn't panic. She thought quickly, knowing she had to protect herself and her home. She grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the window, aiming it directly at the gang members' faces. They flinched, shielding their eyes, unprepared for the sudden light and noise. Titan took advantage of the moment, growling and moving closer to the door. his body tense, ready to defend. The gang realized that this wasn't going to be easy. They whispered to each other, frustration in their voices as they tried to figure out their next move. They had done this before but never encountered someone or something like this woman and her dog. One of them made a step toward the door, trying to force it open, but Titan barked again, louder and sharper, making him stumble back. The woman, seeing an opportunity, opened the door slightly, just enough to make her presence known. She stood tall, her posture confident. She didn't yell or scream. She didn't need to. Her calmness, combined with Titan's protective stance, made the gang hesitate. For a moment there was silence, broken only by Titan's low growl. The woman's heart was racing, but she kept her breathing steady. She had always believed that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but acting in spite of it. She spoke, her voice firm yet controlled, warning them to leave immediately. The gang muttered insults, trying to intimidate her, relying on their prejudices. They didn't expect her to confront them. They didn't expect her to be brave. Titan stepped forward, placing himself between the woman and the intruders. His loyalty was evident in every movement. He would not let them harm her. The gang hesitated, realizing that the plan they had taken for granted might fail. They weren't just dealing with a lone woman. They were facing a team, a bond that could not be broken by fear or threat. The woman took a deep breath, her mind racing with possibilities. She had to think fast, to protect herself and Titan, but also to avoid escalating the situation unnecessarily. She moved slightly to the side, keeping Titan in front, and kept her eyes on each intruder, reading their body language, predicting their next move. They were unsure now, their confidence shaken by her composure and the dog's fierce presence. As the night stretched on, the woman realized this was not a time for hesitation. She quietly reached for her phone again, prepared to call the police if needed. Titan's growls continued, a constant reminder to the intruders that they were not welcome here. The gang began to exchange hurried whispers, their plans unraveling as they realized they might have miscalculated. They didn't know the strength of loyalty, the courage of someone who refused to be a victim. The tension hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, but inside, the calm determination of the woman and Titan filled the space. For the first time, the gang seemed uncertain, unsure of whether they could proceed or whether they should retreat. The woman, aware of every second passing, stayed ready, her mind sharp, her instincts alert. She knew this night would test her courage like never before. And in that quiet, tense moment, as the shadows moved outside and the world held its breath, it became clear that this would not be a night the gang would ever forget. They had underestimated a woman, underestimated her courage, and most of all, underestimated her dog's loyalty. The night felt heavier now, almost like it was pressing down on the quiet streets around her house. Inside, she stayed alert, her heart beating faster than usual, but her mind remained clear. Titan stood beside her, muscles tense, eyes fixed on the shadows moving near the back door. The woman could feel the energy in the air, a mix of fear and determination. She knew the danger was real, but she also knew that panic would only make things worse. She had to think, to act, and to protect her home without letting fear take over. Outside, the gang moved cautiously, testing the door and the windows. They whispered, trying to figure out how to get inside without being noticed. One of them knelt by the door handle, trying to force it open, while the others watched the windows. They laughed quietly, mocking what they thought was a simple job. They had done this before, they thought, and they expected this woman to be just another easy target. But they didn't know her. They didn't know Titan. They didn't know what loyalty and courage could look like when paired together. Titan growled again, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. The woman tightened her grip on the flashlight, moving slowly toward the living room window. She didn't want to be reckless, but she also knew she couldn't let them gain confidence. The shadows outside shifted, and one of the intruders peeked through the window. Titan barked sharply, loud enough to make them jump back. The woman shone the flashlight at the figure, and for a moment the world seemed frozen. The intruder froze as well, staring at the beam of light and the dog's fierce posture. The woman's mind raced. She needed a plan. She couldn't just wait for them to break in. She had to create a situation that would make them think twice. She moved closer to the door, careful to stay out of reach. Titan followed her every step, matching her movements perfectly. It was as if they were moving as one, a single force ready to defend the house. She felt a surge of gratitude for him, realizing that this bond was more than companionship. It was protection, trust, and understanding all rolled into one. The gang whispered among themselves, clearly frustrated by Titan and her calm presence. They had underestimated the situation, and now their confidence was wavering. One of them tried to make a step toward the door again, hoping to surprise her, but Titan barked again, louder and more threatening. The intruder froze, unsure if he should continue. The woman, noticing their hesitation, decided to take a small but calculated risk. She opened the door just enough to make herself visible. She didn't shout, didn't wave her arms. She just stood there, her posture steady, her eyes sharp, and Titan right in front of her, growling softly but clearly warning them to stay back. The intruders exchanged nervous glances. They hadn't expected resistance, and they certainly hadn't expected a dog that was more than just a pet. One of them muttered an insult under his breath, relying on racial prejudice to try to intimidate her. The woman didn't flinch. She had faced discrimination before and had learned that confidence and clarity could silence even the cruelest words. She spoke, her voice calm but firm, telling them to leave immediately. She didn't scream, didn't beg. She simply gave them the warning they needed to hear. Titan's growl grew louder, a deep, warning sound that filled the room. The woman slowly moved a step closer to the intruders, not threatening, but asserting herself. The gang shifted, unsure what to do next. They had thought this would be easy, but now every step felt risky. The dog's loyalty was clear, his readiness to protect her evident, and the woman's courage shone in her calm demeanor. They realized that the situation was not as simple as they had assumed. One of the intruders tried to reach for the door handle again. Titan barked and lunged slightly, enough to make him step back. The woman raised her hand slightly, signaling Titan to stay alert but not attack. She didn't want unnecessary violence, but she wanted them to know that she was prepared for anything. The intruders froze, unsure whether to retreat or push forward. Their plan was falling apart, and the woman could see their confidence slipping. She decided to create another obstacle for them. Quietly, she moved to the side and grabbed a small metal object from a shelf. Nothing dangerous, just something to make noise. She dropped it near the door, letting it clang loudly against the floor. Titan barked again, and the combination of sound, light, and the dog's presence seemed to overwhelm the intruders. They stumbled back, whispering to each other, panic beginning to creep into their voices. The woman realized this was her chance to gain control. She took a step outside the door, just a small one, keeping Titan close. The intruders flinched at the sight of her, their underestimation of her abilities now clear. They had expected fear, hesitation, maybe even retreat. Instead, they saw confidence, courage, and a protective dog that would not let them pass. Time seemed to stretch, every second filled with tension. The intruders whispered furiously, trying to come up with a plan, but the woman remained calm. She spoke again, this time with more authority, warning them that if they didn't leave, the police would be called and they would be caught. Titan growled, adding weight to her words. The intruders hesitated, realizing that their usual tactics might not work. They were facing a situation that was beyond their control. The woman noticed that one of them was trying to signal the others, perhaps to retreat. She didn't relax, didn't let her guard down. Titan remained alert, ears perked, eyes scanning every movement. She could feel the adrenaline, but it was focused, not panic. She had trained herself to stay aware, to use her mind as much as her instincts. The gang's hesitation was giving her the upper hand. Suddenly, one of the intruders made a bold move, stepping toward the door as if he could intimidate her. Titan barked and lunged slightly, stopping him in his tracks. The woman stood firm, making a subtle gesture to Titan to stay calm but ready. The man froze, realizing that the dog was not just a pet but a protector. The other two intruders exchanged looks of concern, unsure whether to continue. The woman spoke again, her tone steady and unwavering. She told them to leave, to go back to where they came from, and to never come near her house again. Her words carried weight, not because they were loud, but because they were confident. Titan's presence amplified that confidence, making the intruders realize that they were not dealing with an ordinary target. For a moment there was silence. The only sounds were Titan's soft growls and the distant hum of the streetlights outside. The intruders whispered quickly among themselves, clearly debating whether to continue or retreat. The woman didn't move, didn't give them any sign of fear. She knew that hesitation could give her the advantage she needed. Titan stayed close, ready to act if necessary. Finally, one of them muttered something that made the others step back. Their plan was failing, and they could feel it. They had underestimated the woman, underestimated Titan, and underestimated the power of courage combined with loyalty. Slowly, they began to retreat, moving away from the house, unsure whether to look back. The woman didn't follow, didn't taunt them. She stayed near the door, keeping an eye on them until they disappeared into the shadows of the neighborhood. After a few tense minutes, the woman closed the door fully, locking it carefully. Titan sat down beside her, still alert but calmer now. She bent down, rubbing his head, whispering words of gratitude and praise. "Good boy, Titan, you kept me safe. I knew I could count on you." He wagged his tail slightly as if acknowledging her words, his loyalty unwavering. The night continued, but the immediate danger had passed. The woman stayed awake for a while, making sure Titan was comfortable and that everything in the house was secure. She reflected on what had just happened, realizing that her calm thinking, quick decisions, and Titan's protection had saved them both. She knew that life could be unpredictable, that danger could appear when least expected, but she also knew that courage and preparation could make all the difference. As she finally settled down to rest, Titan lying at her feet, she felt a sense of accomplishment and relief. The night had tested her, but she had faced it with strength. Outside, the quiet neighborhood returned to its usual calm, but for her and Titan, nothing would ever feel quite the same. They had faced danger together, and they had won. The tension in the air was thick, almost like it had weight. The woman stood by the door, her body tense but her mind clear. Titan was right beside her, his ears alert, muscles coiled like springs, ready to act at a moment's notice. Outside, the gang hesitated. They had expected an easy target, a house that could be broken into without resistance. But what they saw now was entirely different. A woman standing her ground, unwavering, and a dog that was more than just a pet. It was a guardian. One of the intruders stepped forward, trying to show bravado. He smirked, thinking he could intimidate her with sheer numbers. "You shouldn't be standing there, lady," he said, his voice low and threatening. "This is none of your business." The woman didn't flinch. She looked him straight in the eyes, calm but firm, and said, "It is my business when you're trying to break into my home. Leave now or you'll regret it." Her voice was steady, carrying authority. Titan growled low, a warning that echoed through the room and seemed to rattle the intruder more than words ever could. The man laughed nervously, trying to mask his fear, but the other two behind him were clearly uneasy. They glanced at each other, the realization dawning that this night might not go as planned. They had underestimated the woman's courage, and they had underestimated Titan's loyalty. The dog didn't just bark. He moved with purpose, positioning himself between her and the intruders, his gaze never leaving their faces. One of the gang members tried a sudden move, hoping to push past Titan and grab something from the porch. Titan barked and lunged forward, making the man stumble back. The woman didn't panic. She stayed close to Titan, watching carefully. Every movement of the intruders was predictable because she kept calm, her mind analyzing every step. She knew she had the advantage if she stayed composed. "You don't want to do this," she said, her voice rising slightly. Not in anger, but in command. Titan growled louder, his teeth flashing in the dim light. The intruders hesitated. They were beginning to feel the weight of their miscalculation. They had expected fear, silence, and submission. Instead, they saw strength, alertness, and a dog ready to defend without hesitation. The man in front tried to make another step forward, thinking he could intimidate them with his presence. Titan barked, a deep, terrifying sound, and the man froze. The woman moved a little, keeping Titan between her and the gang. "I'm giving you one last chance," she said firmly. "Leave now before this gets worse for you." Her eyes were steady, unwavering. She wasn't threatening unnecessarily, but the message was clear. She would not back down. The intruders whispered among themselves, panic creeping in. They had thought this would be an easy robbery, maybe even profitable, but now doubt had replaced confidence. Titan's growls, the woman's calm determination, and their clear preparation made it obvious that this was not a house to underestimate. The man tried to signal his partners to retreat, but hesitation held them in place. One of the intruders, growing impatient and frustrated, took a step closer, trying to push the envelope. Titan barked and moved forward, his large body blocking any approach. The woman noticed the tension building and took a small but deliberate step forward herself. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't yell. She just stood tall, confident, and alert. It was enough. The intruder froze again, unsure of what to do next. The woman's mind worked quickly. She knew that keeping them guessing was her best strategy. She reached for a small flashlight and clicked it on, swinging it slowly toward the intruders' faces. The sudden light made them blink, giving Titan a chance to step closer and assert his dominance without attacking. The intruders stumbled back, now unsure whether to continue or retreat. Their plan, so carefully thought out, was crumbling. She decided to add another layer of confusion. She picked up a metal object from a table near the door, a decorative bell, and dropped it just inside the entrance. The clanging noise startled the intruders, and Titan barked immediately, moving toward the sound. The combined effect of light, noise, and Titan's presence was more than the gang could handle. They whispered nervously, glancing at each other, realizing they had made a terrible mistake. One of them muttered under his breath, clearly angry but afraid. "This isn't worth it," he said quietly. The others hesitated, the tension between retreat and aggression evident on their faces. The woman didn't speak for a moment. She let the silence stretch, letting them feel the weight of their choices. Titan stood firm, his eyes never leaving the intruders. They were trapped by their own misjudgment. Suddenly, the intruder in front made a bold, reckless move. He tried to reach around Titan, hoping to grab the door handle. Titan barked and lunged forward just enough to make him stumble back. A clear warning that any further attempt would not end well. The woman stepped slightly to the side, making it clear that she was ready to defend herself and her home. The intruder froze, his confidence gone. He realized that this was no ordinary woman and that Titan was no ordinary dog. The other two gang members whispered frantically, trying to decide what to do. Their eyes darted between the woman and Titan, fear creeping into their expressions. They had expected submission, but what they saw instead was courage, preparation, and loyalty that could not be broken. The woman spoke again, her voice calm but firm. "Leave now. You're not welcome here." She didn't need to shout. Titan's growl carried the weight of her words. The intruders hesitated. They looked around, considering retreat. But pride and stubbornness made them pause. The woman stayed steady, making sure not to give them an inch. Titan shifted slightly, positioning himself closer to her, a silent but powerful signal that he would act if needed. The intruder's hesitation gave her an advantage. Every second they lingered, the more confident she became. One of them muttered something that revealed panic. "Maybe we should go," he said. The others glanced at him, realizing that their plan was failing. They had underestimated both the woman and her dog. The realization hit them hard. This was not going to be an easy robbery. This was a house defended by intelligence, courage, and an unwavering bond between human and animal. The woman stayed calm, watching every movement. She didn't move too quickly, didn't make sudden gestures that could provoke them. Her presence, combined with Titan's alertness, made it clear that any attempt to continue would be a mistake. Slowly, almost reluctantly, the intruders began to back away. Their steps were cautious, hesitant. They were leaving, but not without shame, because they had misjudged the situation entirely. Titan barked once more, a warning as they retreated. The woman stayed by the door, watching until they disappeared into the shadows of the neighborhood. The tension finally began to ease. She exhaled slowly, feeling a mix of relief and pride. Titan wagged his tail slightly, acknowledging her presence, his loyalty unwavering. She knelt down, rubbing his head gently. "You kept me safe, Titan. I knew I could count on you." The night continued quietly after that. The woman stayed alert for a while, checking doors and windows to ensure everything was secure. She reflected on what had just happened, realizing that courage, preparation, and a strong bond with Titan had protected her home. She thought about how often people underestimate others based on appearances, and how powerful it could be to stand firm when it matters most. As she finally settled down to rest, Titan at her feet, she felt a sense of accomplishment. They had faced danger together and they had won. The experience left her stronger, more aware and more confident in her ability to handle challenges. Outside, the neighborhood returned to its usual calm, but inside, the bond between her and Titan had been reinforced in a way that no ordinary day could have achieved. This night would remain vivid in her memory for a long time. It wasn't just about defending a house. It was about standing up to fear, trusting instincts and realizing the true power of loyalty and courage. Titan had proven that he was more than a dog. He was a protector, a friend, and a hero. And the woman knew, as she drifted into a cautious sleep, that together, they could face whatever challenges came their way. The night was still tense, even after the gang had retreated a little. The woman stayed by the door, her eyes scanning the darkness outside. Titan remained alert at her side, his body tense, ears perked, and eyes following every shadow. She could feel the adrenaline slowly fading, but the cautious awareness remained. She knew the danger wasn't completely gone. The intruders had come close enough to understand her home, and they could try again if she let her guard down. For now, she needed to act smart, to secure the house and to make sure help was on the way. She moved carefully through her living room, checking all the doors and windows again. Every lock clicked into place with a small sense of relief, but she didn't relax too much. Titan sniffed the corners of the house, occasionally letting out a soft growl at a sound outside that she couldn't hear. She whispered to him, "Good boy. Stay sharp." His loyalty and instinct made her feel safer, but she knew she still had to think clearly. She picked up her phone and dialed the police, explaining calmly and clearly what had happened. The dispatcher's voice was steady, asking questions about the intruders and their movements. The woman described everything in detail, their appearance, their behavior, and how many there were. She also explained how Titan had confronted them and how the gang had retreated. The dispatcher assured her that officers would arrive quickly. Even with the promise of help, she didn't let her guard down. Titan stayed close, moving slightly to position himself between her and the door. Outside, the gang had stopped a short distance away, whispering urgently among themselves. Their confidence was shaken and panic had begun to creep in. They realized that the woman and her dog were not easy targets. They had underestimated the situation entirely. One of them muttered something about calling it a night and retreating to regroup, but the others looked unsure. Their escape wasn't going to be simple. The neighborhood, though quiet, had several houses with motion sensors and street lights. Every movement outside risked attracting attention. The woman could hear the faint shuffle of footsteps through the partially open window. She didn't panic. She stayed close to Titan, her eyes alert but her breathing controlled. She knew that staying calm was her greatest advantage. Any sudden movement or noise could startle the intruders, or worse, put her in a vulnerable position. Titan's low growl filled the silence, a warning that reinforced her presence. She whispered to him, "Let's make sure they don't try anything stupid." He responded with a subtle nod of his head, or so it seemed to her, and a wag of his tail that was cautious but steady. As the gang attempted to move further away, one of them slipped on the uneven grass outside and let out a small grunt. The sound carried slightly through the night. Titan reacted immediately, barking sharply and moving toward the sound near the door. The woman didn't intervene. She let Titan assert his dominance. The intruders froze, realizing that they were being tracked even from a distance. Their escape had become a tense ordeal rather than a simple retreat. The woman stayed vigilant, watching the dark street and listening to every sound. Occasionally, she could hear the faint rustle of leaves or the distant hum of a car, but she kept her focus on the intruders. She knew that sometimes the threat lingered longer than expected. Her heart beat steadily, though, because she knew she had done everything right. She had prepared, she had stayed calm, and she had trusted Titan's instincts. Together, they had turned the tables on a group of people who had thought they could intimidate her. Within minutes, the sound of sirens in the distance gave her hope. The police were arriving faster than expected, and she could feel a sense of relief creeping in, though she didn't let her guard down until she saw them. Titan stayed alert, ears twitching at every approaching sound. The first officer pulled into the street, lights flashing, followed closely by a second car. The officers jumped out, asking quick questions and moving toward her house with cautious but confident steps. The woman explained everything again to the officers, how the gang had tried to break in, how Titan had confronted them, and how they had retreated. She described each member as best she could, noting their positions and actions. The officers listened intently, impressed by her calm and clear account. One of them patted Titan on the head, praising his alertness and bravery. "You've got a smart dog here," the officer said, and she smiled, feeling a little pride mixed with relief. Titan wagged his tail slightly, acknowledging the attention but remaining focused on the outside, his instincts still sharp. The officers began searching the area, walking slowly through the shadows where the intruders had been. They checked nearby streets and alleys, looking for any signs that the gang might still be lingering. The woman stayed inside, keeping an eye on Titan, who paced a little but remained close. She thought about how quickly events could change and how lucky she had been to have him by her side. Without Titan, she realized the night might have been far more dangerous. Neighbors began to wake as the police cars patrolled the area. A few came out onto their porches, curious about the commotion. The woman explained calmly that there had been an attempted break-in and that the gang had retreated thanks to Titan and her vigilance. The neighbors nodded in understanding, some expressing concern, others relief. There was a sense of community forming, a small but important support system that made her feel safer in her home. Meanwhile, the gang was scattered, trying to regroup in the darkness. Some were angry, others shaken, and all were aware that they had underestimated their target. They had thought they could act with ease and leave without consequences. Instead, they had encountered a woman who was brave, alert, and quick-thinking, with a dog whose loyalty and intelligence could not be ignored. They realized that their plan had failed entirely, and that any further attempt would likely end badly. The police continued to survey the neighborhood, taking notes and photographs and asking neighbors if they had seen anything unusual. The woman stayed patient, answering questions calmly, her mind still alert. She knew that even after the intruders left, there could be lingering threats. Her focus remained on ensuring that Titan and she were safe, that the house was secure, and that the authorities had all the information they needed. As the night wore on, the tension slowly began to ease. The officers reassured her that they would patrol the area through the night, keeping an eye out for any suspicious activity. Titan lay down near her feet, still alert but calmer now, his head resting on his paws. She felt a wave of gratitude and pride. They had faced a dangerous situation together and had come out safe. Her courage and Titan's loyalty had been enough to prevent disaster. The woman reflected quietly on what had just happened. She thought about the intruders and how they had misjudged her. Assuming she would be afraid or passive, she thought about how quickly things could change in life and how important it was to stay calm, think clearly, and trust in instincts. She also realized that her bond with Titan had been crucial. The dog's loyalty, intelligence, and bravery had given her the confidence to face a situation that could have been terrifying. Neighbors began returning to their homes, reassured by the police presence and the woman's calm explanations. Some stopped by to check if she was okay, offering kind words and small gestures of support. The sense of community strengthened, giving her a feeling of safety and connection that made the night's events slightly less frightening. Titan remained vigilant, watching every movement, but his relaxed posture suggested he understood the immediate danger had passed. As the early hours of the morning approached, the woman finally allowed herself to relax slightly. She ensured all doors and windows were secure, made sure Titan had water, and took a few moments to breathe. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by a mix of relief, pride, and gratitude. She had faced a threatening situation head-on, relied on her instincts and her dog's loyalty, and had emerged safe. Outside, the street returned to its quiet, peaceful rhythm. The intruders had gone, their plans ruined, and the neighborhood would remain alert, wiser because of what had occurred. Inside, the woman and Titan settled, their bond strengthened by the night's events. They had faced danger together and they had prevailed. For her, the night was a reminder that courage could take many forms, standing firm, thinking clearly, and trusting in those who were loyal and steadfast. Titan had proven himself as more than just a dog. He had been a partner, a guardian, and a friend, and as dawn began to lighten the sky, the woman knew that they had survived not just because of luck, but because of preparation, bravery, and the powerful connection between a human and her dog. The morning sun began to cast its gentle light over the quiet streets. The night's events still lingered in her mind, vivid and intense, but now there was a sense of calm and relief. The intruders had fled, and the police had taken notes, ensuring that the neighborhood was safe for now. Titan lay near her feet, still alert but relaxed, the soft rise and fall of his breathing a comforting rhythm. She reached down, rubbing his head gently, whispering, "We made it, Titan, you were amazing." He responded with a quiet wag of his tail, as if acknowledging his role in the night's events, a silent hero in his own right. She dressed quietly and stepped outside for a moment, letting the fresh morning air wash over her. The neighborhood had returned to its peaceful rhythm, though the memory of the previous night hung in the air like a shadow. A few neighbors waved at her as they began their day, their expressions a mix of curiosity, concern, and admiration. She waved back, grateful for their presence, but her thoughts were still on the events that had unfolded. It was one thing to survive a threat, but another to understand its impact and what it meant for the community. Later, the police returned to follow up. They asked her to provide more details about the intruders, about Titan's reaction, and about any evidence they might have left behind. She described everything calmly, recalling each movement, each sound, and each interaction. Her account was precise but natural, filled with the kind of clarity that came from paying attention under pressure. The officers nodded, impressed by her composure and the bond she shared with her dog. "You both did an incredible job last night," one officer said. "This could have gone very differently if you hadn't acted so quickly." She simply smiled, feeling a quiet sense of pride, but also understanding that the real credit belonged to Titan as much as to her own quick thinking. Word of the incident began to spread through the neighborhood. People came by to check if she was okay, offering small gestures of support like coffee, baked goods, or simply kind words. The community had seen many things before, but this story was different. It wasn't just about a break-in. It was about courage, loyalty, and the unexpected power of a dog protecting its owner. Her story became a point of discussion, a reminder that bravery could take many forms, and that preparation and vigilance were invaluable. As the day went on, the woman reflected on what had happened. She thought about the intruders, how they had underestimated her, how they had assumed she would be easy to scare. They had relied on prejudice and fear, but what they encountered was far stronger than they expected. She realized that the night had been a lesson, not only in survival but also in the importance of self-confidence and the value of the bond between humans and animals. Titan had been more than a protector. He had been a partner, responding instantly to danger and giving her the courage to act decisively. She also thought about the police and the neighbors, and how their support had made her feel safer. Even in moments of fear and uncertainty, knowing that there were people around who cared and systems in place to help had made a difference. She reflected on how small communities could be powerful when people looked out for one another. The night's events had shown her that vigilance, preparation, and courage didn't have to be solitary. They could be shared, reinforced by trust and loyalty from both people and animals. Later in the day, she received a call from one of the officers. They had tracked down some of the intruders based on evidence left behind near her house. Some had been caught trying to flee the area, and others were being investigated. Hearing that justice was in motion brought her relief. She had faced fear head-on, and now there was a sense that the danger was being addressed properly. She made notes of everything she remembered, ensuring that she could provide full testimony if needed. She felt empowered, knowing that her actions combined with Titan's loyalty had made a tangible difference. As news of the incident spread further, local media outlets caught wind of the story. They wanted to feature the woman and her heroic dog, highlighting the courage, intelligence, and quick thinking that had prevented a crime. At first, she hesitated. She wasn't someone who sought attention, but she realized that sharing the story could inspire others. She agreed to speak briefly, emphasizing preparation, awareness, and the remarkable bond she shared with Titan. Photos were taken, not of her face but showing Titan and her safe home, conveying the narrative of courage and loyalty rather than personal exposure. The story went viral locally, and soon people from other neighborhoods and even other cities were reading about it. Comments.